Hello and welcome. I'm Judy Sedgman, the host for Innate Health, Creating Healthy Communities. And so welcome to this next edition. I think you might recall, if you've watched previous shows, that this is a series of shows about the way in which people manifest their own well-being and the resiliency that's innate to all people, and the promise of a new way of looking at mental health. And I've had a number of guests, and I have a return guest today, Christine Heath, who was with us one time on a panel some time back. And she's here visiting Florida from Hawaii, where she's the executive director of the Hawaii Counseling and Education Center. And Christine is a person who's had an enormous amount of experience in this work, and I think you'll be very interested in her story and the kinds of clientele that she's been able to help over the years. So welcome, Christine. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Judy.
And one of the things that I'd like you to start with is give us a little background on how you got started, you know, what you started doing as a therapist, and then how you made a transition into the work that you're doing now. So if you could tell us that story, I think it gives some good background for people to understand the journey.
Sure. I started out as a marriage and family therapist in the 70s. And that was at a time when things were very different in the field of psychology. In fact, being positive in therapy was considered bad therapy. And of course, now there's all kinds of schools of thinking about being positive and positive psychology. And I was really fortunate because the kind of work that I did was working with women and children who were sexually or physically abused as children and in their current relationships. So I was very active in the domestic violence, setting up shelters and that kind of community. And I was very burned out.
Yeah.
I was in there helping people, and I really saw that people could recover from anything. I really believed that no matter what happened to somebody, that they could get better, and that was the reason I went into counseling in the first place. And I was doing that, I was helping people, and I was getting really burned out in doing that. I was getting a little bit stressed out myself. And I went to a new training on this new kind of working with people that was based on looking at health rather than on what was wrong with people. And actually the reason I went for myself was because I thought it would be a better place to meet men than bars, which I wasn't very successful at finding healthy men there.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the reason in my own thinking for going. But what I got was a whole new way of looking at life. And no, I didn't find a man there, but I did find my happiness. And that was what was the thing that made it so powerful for me, was that my burned out stress went away overnight, basically.
Wow.
And as a result of that, when I walked into my clients the next week, it was like a different therapist walked in.
Yeah.
And even the case notes that I wrote and that were written at that time were remarkably different. And people responded to me in a much different way. So I kind of started out working with women who were, I call it living in trauma, and watch them transform over the next year. And all the things that I'd been working really hard with them on for 5 and 6 years suddenly happened without effort. And they got better, they started having healthy relationships with people, they got married, they ended therapy, they went out and got jobs and were successful in their lives. So it was really a powerful thing for me, which was good because I probably may not have stuck with it otherwise, but I could see that when I talked differently to people, they got better faster.
So Christine, though, when you do something like that, when you've been doing this with people, and suddenly you come in and you say, not doing that anymore, we're changing. Were your clients amenable to that? Did you experience, how did you explain it to your clients?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I did a videotape after about the first year of clients that were with me, and I would say 90% of my clients stayed with me. There were maybe 3 or 4 clients that did not stay with me, but by and large, everybody stayed, and what they said was that they could see that I was better.
Ah.
And they were following me. If I was better, they wanted to be better too.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, it was a little bit like the blind leading the blind, because in those days we were just beginning to look at how to work from health. There weren't any books or places to go for training or anything really.
Yeah.
And they all indicated that there had been something missing in therapy. There was always something that wasn't quite, didn't feel right to them. And when I talked to them about what we call the 3 principles, they almost unilaterally said, oh, that's what's different. That's what's been missing.
I see.
And so as they saw that, and they started doing better, and then they'd kind of bounce off of each other. One person would come in a better place, and the next person would get an insight from that. So it was a very, very powerful thing.
So if I were a person who's watching this show right now, and let's say that I or a member of my family might be in some sort of mental health facility or have received mental health care, what would you tell me that my other therapists aren't telling me right now? What would be so different? So if I were to come to you or one of us that does this work, you know, how in a nutshell would you get me started? How would you explain the principles and get me going?
Well, first of all, what I would want you to know is that I've worked with many, since that time I've worked with people with just about every diagnosis that there is. And so what I would say to you is that you're not different. And that you have this ability to, and you do live in mental well-being all the time. That's something that I didn't know before. I thought that people could be damaged by what happened to them or what they did to other people or the circumstances of their lives. And what I realized is that that part of us that's healthy cannot be damaged by our life, can't be damaged by the outside. And so everybody has the ability to live in that state of mental well-being. So that's what I'd tell people, is it doesn't matter what your diagnosis is or what's happened to you in your life, you can be happy and you can be healthy. And
that would be an amazingly good news
for
people that have been in therapy for a long time. And I know that I've heard other patients say that even though they thought the therapist who told them that must be crazy, somehow at some deep level that kind of struck them, but wait a minute. You know, I kind of think I am okay sometimes. Yeah, so that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, you know, everybody does this innocently, but in our culture, we're kind of programmed to fix what's wrong. So the focus has been with many traditional therapies is to focus on fixing what's wrong. And that generally just provides people the ability to cope with their life, to cope with their anxiety, to cope with their depression. And what focusing on innate health does is allows people to actually recover, to recover their health and live in a state of mental well-being most of the time. That's a real different, that's why we call it a true paradigm shift, because we're looking at how we create our experience, whether it's well-being or anxiety or depression, rather than why we're creating that and what we're creating and doing that, how we're thinking about it.
That's always a shock when I teach, as you know, in graduate school, and my students are always shocked to discover that they were making it up, you know, no matter whether it was good or bad, it was all coming from their own thinking. And it's a relief to know that if you can make up one thing, you can make up anything. And as simple as that sounds, it's profound for people, I think.
It is. It's very profound. And, you know, part of the other thing is that sometimes people have been in therapy for a long time And they kind of come to believe that they are damaged,
Yes.
that they can't recover. And sometimes they're even told that. And so sometimes getting around that thinking takes a little while, and I almost have to point out moments when they're in well-being in the session to help them to see that really it does exist.
Yeah.
They're just not paying attention to it.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting aspect of bringing out the health in people, that you know, you see it as soon as you're looking for it. And I was wondering, you know, one of the questions that I get asked very frequently, and not being a therapist myself, I refer to people like you for the answer, but is, okay, you know, but I've got this nephew and he's been a substance abuser for 20 years and he's been through all kinds of programs and nothing ever sticks. You know, he comes back, he thinks he's fine, and, you know, things go wrong, and he keeps going to these meetings and it really bums him out. And, you know, people get into this way of thinking that, you know, okay, I've tried everything and nothing's worked and now it's too late for me. So I'd love to hear you talk a little, I'm sure you've seen such people, I know you have, and so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, about how you are able to help those people.
Well, you know, this is the thing about helping people, is that luckily I don't have to do it.
Yeah.
Because I can't do it, you know. It's like people frequently will come in and say, how can I help my son, or how can I help my husband, or how can I help my wife? And the truth is that you can't. But you can live in a better state of mind and point them in the direction of their health. And that's as much as any of us can do. And so I can't like fix anybody. I don't have, you know, if I could do that, I'd be really rich and I'd be retired and living on the beach in Hawaii, you know. But we can't do that. But what we can do is live in the healthiest place we can live in, and then point people toward their health. Because that's, when people do that, it's amazing how they can wake up and stop using. I mean, I'm a substance abuse counselor, and I'm a marriage and family therapist, and have a lot of credentials, and I've worked with a lot of different kinds of populations. Some of them are considered very difficult to deal with. But to me, everybody that's sitting in front of me is there because they want to get better. And at one level, whatever they're doing is their best shot at trying to feel better. So when people are living in a state of mind that's creating a lot of negativity, sometimes using alcohol or drugs is the best thing they can see to do to feel better. So what I do is I help people to see that that's their innate health at work, using misguided thinking. You know, it's kind of like going into whatever they've seen around them or what their relatives have done, and using that as a way to try to feel better, rather than realizing that that's already in them, that children are born into a state of mental well-being. In fact, they just did a study in Japan where they studied babies, and from, I don't know how much money they spent on this, but they discovered that the calming response in a baby was innate. Like most mothers would tell you, duh, yeah, that's true. But they did that. But the thing is then they started to talk about it and said, we don't know what happens to it after we're babies. But the truth is that's inside of all of us. It's always there. And when we calm down, it's amazing how our thinking gets better on its own. And I think that's the hardest thing for people sometimes to believe or to appreciate, is that we don't have to do anything to get healthy. We have to let go of the things that we're doing that are creating our stress and our anxiety.
So could you give us a case, you know, talk about maybe a case history of somebody, that just to give people a feel for how this would play out, you know, just somebody that you've treated in the past, and without any details or names or anything, but just to kind of give a feeling. Because I think a lot of people think, well, if they're not bringing out my past and going over things and talking about my, what the heck do they do with people? You know, so if you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Well, what we do is we teach people how they create their experience of life moment to moment. And what we do is we help them to see how the three principles, we talk about three principles, which are fundamental underlying principles that create our psychic world in every person. Okay? And these are spiritual principles. And by spiritual, I mean they're a kind of a formless energy. We can kind of see how they work rather than really pointing at something or thinking about something. It kind of reminds me of that when I talk about this as spiritual, is kind of like in the Harry Potter movies, you know, and he has the cloak,
or invisibility.
The invisibility cloak,
Yes.
and so you can see the evidence of him because the door will open and shut, but you can't see him. Harry. And that's kind of what the principles are, is they're always at work creating whatever experience we're having. So the 3 principles of mind, thought, and consciousness create our mental well-being, and they create our mental distress. So they're always happening, and what we do is help people to see it in the moment, to see how thought works, rather than focusing on what am I thinking about, why am I thinking about it, when did I start thinking about it, and what happened to me to make me think about it. So it's seeing, like, moment to moment, how does thought work? How does consciousness work to create awareness? The ability to see this room, like you and I can see each other because we're both conscious and aware. Now, I may be also conscious of whether my blouse is right or whatever, but those are just my thoughts, see, and then I become aware of it. And mind is the energy that creates all of us. So it's the energy of life, and as that comes through a person, you can see the evidence of that. You can see a sparkle in the eye, you can see a shine in the face, and when a person is doing a lot of negative thinking, that kind of gets covered up, and you can't see it as well. Sometimes you want to go like, anybody in there? Because a person is so caught up in their thinking. But when a person is present, and they're in that beautiful state of mind, you can clearly see it on a person. Now, you can't really say, well, it's that pimple on the right, or it's this hair on the left. It's not a form, but you can see the evidence of it in people.
It's interesting because I used to teach medical students, and one of the things I told them is that there's nobody that can't tell the difference between the living and the dead. I mean, I've never had a medical student say, no, that person is alive. So, and that's really what we're talking about, is that breath of life that is very, you feel it. You know it's there. It is. If you've ever been with anybody who died, it's very, very fascinating to me. My mother died about 1.5 years ago, and she was very old, and it was time for her to die. She just started sleeping and died. And we saw her, and then we went home because they thought she'd lived through the night, and 2 hours later she passed away. So we ran back up to the hospital, and 2 hours later she was in the exact same position we left her in, but it looked totally different. And that's just, you can't really can't find the words that describe it, but you know it when you see it. So, like for me, I didn't really know what mental well-being looked like in people. You know, like I thought that really helping a person from where they were at is like you would get to a place where you were healthy, and that was it. I didn't even realize that there were levels of mental well-being that were way beyond anything I'd ever seen before. That's interesting because people say, you know, we learn everything there is to know in this field about mental illness, and very little is taught. A lot of my students who are doctors will make that observation. No one ever discusses health, you know, what it looks like when people are mentally well. But I could tell you a lot about how they manifest a lot of illness. And it's interesting to me because I've been thinking recently about the diagnostic categories that all of you use in order to explain things to people and to Bill. And I thought, you know, it's like a catalog of how people can misuse their thinking in so many different ways.
That's right.
But at the heart of it, and I think that's what I'd like you to talk a little bit about, at the heart of it, it's all coming from the same thing, but it's just your way of using it.
Well, you know, it's like, what's interesting to me about the whole DSM 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, whatever it is that it's describing how people are similar. You know, it's like in similar ways we think, and then we manifest symptoms. Okay, so you can look at a person, and that's just kind of telling you how they're misusing their thinking, and they don't know it. they don't know that that's what's causing it. And so, you know, over time you do get things like chemical changes and all kinds of physiological responses to using thought in a way that's not, it wasn't designed for.
Right.
So what I think is interesting about that is that you can basically take that book and you've got your, you know, really more severe diagnosis where people hallucinate and they have trouble staying in the present moment because they're doing so much vivid thinking. And then you have people that are basically some form of anxiety or some form of depression. And that's just how we can think in insecure ways, negatively or fearfully. And when you extrapolate that and you kind of move into the various conjugations that people can do with their thinking, you get a lot of diagnosis. That's why the DSM-5 is bigger than the DSM-4. We keep coming up with new ways of thinking and therefore manifest different symptoms. But that's all it is.
And you know, it's an interesting thing to me. Years ago when I was in college, I did volunteer work at the Boston State Mental Hospital. And we used to go sing with everybody. We didn't have any skills whatsoever, but we were nice girls and we sang. And so the patients would form a circle, and there was one lady that always had an empty chair next to her. One empty chair. Somebody sit over here, but nobody sat over there. And I was very puzzled by that because no one ever violated that. No one ever sat in that chair, but it was empty. And sometimes people were standing up, but they wouldn't sit there. So I asked the lady, I said, what's with the empty seat next to you? She said, it's not empty, my bear is there. And, you know, my first instinct as a naive young girl was to say, oh, come on, there's no bear. But people were giving me the look like, lay off. You know, and the other patients, one of the other patients came up to me and said, we all understand she needs her bear. You know, leave it alone. And I thought that was so sweet that they just respected that. They knew it was an imaginary bear. And I've thought of that so many times when I see clients that have made up something that's so important to them, but it's totally illusionary. And yet, you know, in a sense, you have to respect the fact that there's a power behind that, that they made that up, and it's until it's no longer important to them, and until they see that they're making it up, they need it. You know, and that's the same thing with a lot of our insecurities. You know, we make up that we need to smoke, or we need to drink, or we need to keep going to the hairdresser, or we can't, you know, whatever it is we need to do. And yet, at some point, we go, wait, you know, that's my imagination.
Well, it's you know, it's what happens with our thinking. If we think about something enough, it seems like it's real. And so the more you think about, I need this, I want this, I gotta have it, it seems like it's more real each time. Like, you know, an easy way of looking at that is when people start thinking about how tired they are. Oh, I'm tired. Oh, I'm so tired. Oh, I'm so tired. And then you get a phone call from somebody, and you go, oh, hi. Oh, really? Oh, I'd love to do that. That would be wonderful. And suddenly, your tiredness is gone. And it's just that seeing how whatever we think will seem real to us unless we wake up and see that it's just thought. Like for me, I had to see that for myself. I had to see that the reason I got burned out was because I did a lot of negative thinking. I was really focused on problems and what was wrong and trying to fix people, and of course people were in crises all the time. And it was very stressful for me. But what I realized was that, oh, I'm doing this. I'm the one that's made up all this stuff about myself that I'm coping with, that I'm dealing with. And it wasn't real. But I thought it for so many years, I forgot that I made it up. So when people see that, you know, it's kind of like, I had a client that came in. She was 18 years old. She had just graduated from high school. She'd completed one semester of college, and then she dropped out and she couldn't handle it. She came in and she was very hostile and she was kind of at the time it was the goth. You know, she was into looking very gothic and very depressed. And she came in and promptly told me that she was bipolar, and she didn't know why she was coming in to see me because she couldn't get better. And so I said, well, that's okay, let's just give it a try. You know, your mom wants you to come. And I don't think that it's true that you can't get better. She goes, well, people don't recover from being bipolar. And I said, well, I don't know, don't they? I mean, I know some people that were diagnosed with that and they're no longer having any symptoms. And so it took her 3 sessions, and she literally would sit like this and look at me and glare at me. And then one day she came in and she didn't have all the black stuff all over her. She just looked softer.
Yeah.
She looked better. And I said to her, I said, how are you doing? And she said, well, I'm feeling better, but I'll get bad again, don't worry about it. And I said, well, what makes you think that? She said, because I always do.
Oh.
And I said, now, isn't it interesting that you're focusing on the fact that you always feel worse again, but isn't it also true that you always felt better?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, over time, she just continued to change. And this is kind of a funny story, because I would tell her, I would send her back to our psychiatrist with the symptoms and how she had improved, and he would increase her medication. And after the 3rd time, she said, I'm not going back to him. And I said, well, you know, it's up to you. But I mean, I literally sent him testing. I sent him everything to show him that she was getting better. And he didn't. And then a month later, I was talking to her and I said, you know, have you been back to the doctor to get your medication refilled? And she said, oh, I went off my medication a month ago. I was like, oh, okay, well, you're kind of supposed to like tell your therapist that, you know, so that we can be careful of things. And she stayed with me for about a year longer, and she never went back on her medication, and now she's a nurse and she works in a psychiatric hospital for adolescents.
Isn't that sweet?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah, it's just that, you know, that you can, the power is within us to understand why we're creating what we're doing. Like, there are things that happen, like you can't stop yourself from thinking.
No.
You know, that's an involuntary thing. And sometimes we malfunction. You know, sometimes our thinking malfunctions. But if you understand that A, you're the thinker, and that if you just calm down, your thinking will reset and it'll get back to health, you can get through anything. You can recover from it.
You know, that's the magic of it. The thinking is so transitory, and it comes and goes, and now you see it, now you don't. And we forget that. It's how people forget their keys.
Yeah.
You know, I put it down, but gosh, I thought about something else, and now I've lost it. So I think that's the beautiful part of our work, but many people think it's too simple. So we'll be talking more about that. And we kind of need to wrap up this conversation, but I want to thank you very much, and I wonder if there's one last little tidbit that you'd like to share with everyone before we stop.
Well, the only thing that I'd like to remind people is that you can feel good no matter what. And if you have been, receiving services and you haven't gotten better and you really want to check this out, there's a website called www.3pgc.org. And there's videotapes of people talking about how to recover. There's a videotape of a man by the name of Sydney Banks that if you sit and listen to those videotapes, it'll change how you see things. And you'll just be able to find a sweeter, nicer feeling. But there's all kinds of people, psychiatrists, business people, therapists, all kinds of people talking about the principles and how to recover your health.
Yes.
So check it out and see. And there's also a list of practitioners on there from around the country, around the world, actually.
Around the world, yes. Okay.
So, yeah, it's available to anybody. It's free.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to thank Christine very much for being our guest. I always enjoy talking to Chris because she is what she says. She has such a beautiful feeling, and having known her a long time, I know she's helped a lot of people, or a lot of people have helped themselves in her presence. So it's been a real privilege to have Chris with us, and we will do a second installment with Chris and have another Innate Health program in the near future. So thank you for joining us, and be well.
Thank you, Judy.
Okay.